Now to less violent conversation, I hope, with Andrew Eborn, who is here. He's a barrister and broadcaster. He's got our paper review today. Hello, Andrew. How are you?
It's lovely to see you. And you've been on everything, haven't you?
I've been a very busy boy. I've been a busy boy, but not as busy as these dentists in the Daily Mail, who are going to have to work for the NHS. Apparently, they'll be forced to treat health service patients in exchange for their taxpayer-funded training. And it's interesting, Andrew, because a lot of people sort of think, well, hold on, if we're training these people, if we're spending, you know, this is not just an arts course. We're not paying for a few books here. This is not the kind of history and politics course that I did at university. This is a lot of equipment, a lot of years of learning for dentists, for doctors, for nurses and so on. And especially, I think people get pretty knocked, actually, when dentists and doctors, who are pretty highly paid people anyway, although they would have us believe that they need, you know, major pay rises, get trained on the public purse. Yeah. And or maybe, you know, they're paying their £9,000 a year, which is a lot of money, but at the same time, the cost of their courses is a heck of a lot more. And then they go off to the private sector. I think this is an interesting thing. So what's happening here?
Well, you're absolutely right, and this is what's happened. It's something which should have happened years and years ago. Trying to get an NHS doctor or dentist has been a nightmare for everybody, especially during the pandemic and lockdown, and people's teeth were suffering. You hear terrible reports about people trying to do home dentistry,
pulling their own teeth out. It's horrendous.
All that sort of stuff. So it's been a long time in the coming. I don't think I know anybody who would disagree with the fact that you should do some work in the NHS, and it's all part of this general look at the NHS, which has dominated the headlines. And we're getting an ageing population at the moment. I think it's saying by 2037, the over 85 is likely to grow by 55%. So we've got all these statistics turning around, and the promises that are being made, apart from making sure that people work through the NHS if they train as a dentist, which is right. They're talking about the pledge of 300,000 extra NHS staff, which should be there.
Yes, and this big plan by Rishi Sunak and Steve Barclay, the health secretary. They're talking about a sort of 15-year plan announced yesterday. And that's interesting because there's so many times when people say the government is far too short, you know, many governments far too short term, always thinking about the next election. But actually, this time, we've got a government that's talking about 15 years in the future. That's very different,
and you have to, because politicians are in the business of being elected. Yes. And every so many years, you've got to make short-term policy. So it's right and proper that we look at these big issues. And what are they saying? 7.4 million patients currently on the waiting list in England, which is a record high. 44% of admin, they're saying, will be automated. Yeah. So as you know, I'm a passionate advocate about the engagement of AI and robotics. And one of the things about is not only getting a bigger workforce, but also making that more efficient. And the advances in AI, we again reported this week, they're going to be able to reduce waiting lists as a result of handling that. But also AI is a massive advantage to the medical profession. It can diagnose illnesses a lot earlier and so on and so forth.
But there will be people who will say, actually, I don't want AI involved here. I want a human being examining me, making decisions about me, making clear what treatment I should get. What would you say to people who are a bit nervous about that?
Well, very simple. AI is already here, and we've been using it. It's actually a phrase from the 1950s about the artificial intelligence, and everything is now AI. I think what we have to do is put into perspective. What we're talking about here are efficiencies. It's not about getting rid of doctors. It's a really powerful tool. And very recently, we had some great stories about AI. The superbug, which kills 1 million people. They found a cure through that, through AI. AI basically means that you can disseminate information at a far greater speed than a human can do. So the way to look at it is to say, look, it's a tool which will be used by the medical profession to make it more efficient. It's a tool for finding out about diseases and so on and so forth, working out your problems with Diet Coke, work out all those sort of things. And
I have no problem with Diet Coke. I just drink too much of it. It's interesting, though, on a more serious note, is really AI could identify terrorist threats, apparently.
Yes, absolutely. And this is what they were saying, is basically they're looking for patterns. It's an Israeli AI, which they've been looking at that sort of stuff, and so looking at patterns within the system to say, okay, is this likely to cause an issue? And that's the great thing about AI. It actually, I mean, it's predicted, Goldman Sachs says about 300 million jobs will be lost to AI. And Stephen Hawking said it's our greatest human achievement, but also potentially the biggest existential threat. And the key to do is to understand what it can do. It can disseminate information in an incredibly powerful way. So looking looking at threats, looking at patterns of behaviour, and so on and so forth, is the way that it's going to take things further forward. And so I talk around the world, as you know, exactly about AI, educating people about it. And that's the biggest thing to do. And I think we're talking about regulation. What you need to do is to understand, if I have a fork, I can use it for eating spaghetti, or I can stab you in the back. What happens in politics a lot. Indeed. The reality, however, is you don't stop production of forks. What you do is you turn around and say, let's regulate behaviour. Let's understand what it can do, but harness those great abilities as a result. But yes, certainly looking at patterns of behaviour, that's going to happen. We talk about lie detectors. I was speaking fairly recently and contributing to the AI Summit over here as part of London Tech Week. And the next stage is it can analyse your dreams.
It can analyse your dreams.
So if you can basically, and they've got this thing where you can get pictures based on your brainwaves as to what you're actually thinking.
Although, Andrew, let's be honest here, who has ever said, tell me more about your dream? You know, someone says, let me tell you about my dream, and then someone goes, oh, here we go. I just want to ask you about a very serious story, actually, on page 3 of The Times, which is about the Titan robot finding the wreck straight away. I mean, we covered this in great depth here on Talk TV, and a lot of people were very, very interested in this story. But what is the Times telling us on page 3
well, it's basically,
in regard to this?
They managed to get down there incredibly quickly. And first of all, it is an absolute tragedy. And I think the narrative in the paper comparing illegal immigrants and so on and so forth and saying the narrative should be different because they're multimillionaires, I think was actually very distasteful. I think a human life is a human life, and you need to look at that sort of side. What it does show, however, is just how quick they were able to identify these things. And it's a lot of questions will be asked. They found, obviously, human remains, which is awful. We need to work out exactly what happened to this particular vessel, the Titan as it was called, and to say, look, was there a problem in this particular vessel, which is the reason it did have this spectacular implosion. And look at that sort of stuff. But it did find it very, very quickly. And I think this is the whole point about being able to pinpoint things on the bottom of the floor is incredible. But it's a big community, and they were talking about that. The reason, and when they were talking about it, is they know each other in this community, the people who are these explorers, and so there's a very personal loss on that sort of basis as well.
What do you think? I mean, you're a pretty forward-thinking, adventure sort of orientated person. Would you have gone on that vessel if someone said, right, you don't have to pay 195 grand, you can just go? What would you have done?
I love to explore the world, but in safety. I'm not really very good at tight enclosures. I don't know about you. Would you have gone?
No.
I think I would absolutely try and look at the sort of risk factors and so on and so forth. I love the idea, and the Chinese are now looking at mining on the moon and so on and so forth. I love the idea of exploring, and it's crazy to think we're going to live on one planet forever. There are billions out there yet to be explored. But the short answer is, I'm not very good at enclosed spaces. I don't know many people who are.
And it was meant to only be for a couple of hours, of course.
And that was what was supposed to be intended. You go down, have a quick look, come back again. And you have James Cameron. He went several times down to see the Titanic, and he talked about his side. And there are lots of questions yet to be asked. And what happens in the media is we always try and fill the gaps, don't we? If we don't know what the answers might be, we speculate as to what might have happened. And I think that's the issue, is people wonder what have happened. It's all going to come out, but all I would urge people to do is just be tasteful about it.
Because
of course, there are lives and people at the end of the story, and it works on that premise.
Well, absolutely. I actually interviewed last Friday, not yesterday, but the previous Friday, someone who was a very good friend of the father and son who were on there, and it was very, very moving to hear from him. It's interesting, you just intimated there, you just referenced a tech story about China drilling the moon for minerals. What on earth is going on here?
Well, it's very logical, isn't it? There are lots of minerals everywhere. The more we have the ability to explore space, the final frontier, well, probably not the final frontier, there's several more years to come.
Well, indeed,
But they are, absolutely, there's got to be fantastic minerals on these different planets, and China, they put their flag up there, and they're going to be looking at that sort of side. And I think we're in a world, another seismic change in tech and science, and I think looking at that sort of principle and working out how things are going to work is going to be tremendous. But that's what they're going to do, is start looking at that sort of stuff. It's very logical, and that won't be the end of it. There will be all sorts of glorious things that we're discovering about science, about technology, about other planets, and this is why we're going to live a lot longer. And several of the papers today are talking about these new diets, like the fasting diet, how you can live longer as a result of that, and how
it's
special.
Apparently the one to do is the 8-hour one, where you eat in an 8-hour period, sort of intermittent fasting. That's the one where you really do lose weight, and I know that there's a fasting guide to blast body fat, boost your brain and stay young. My goodness, and look like David Gandhi, apparently, in the Times as well, that you've had a look at.
Oh, absolutely. And this is what they're saying, is that apparently it's very good for you to let the body just heal a bit after you've eaten a meal. And the longer you can do it, and they're sort of saying is that to get you going, if you want to really burst that belly fat, 36-hour fast to get you going first of all.
36-hour fast?
36-hour fast.
Seems like quite a long time.
Well, but you're allowed to have, during that time, about sort of liquids and so on and so forth. So I'm talking about 500 calories, which ain't a lot.
No, it's not.
But what they're sort of saying is that there are different ones for different people, and you can have a look. They're saying that the 5 to 2, which is the classic weight loss fast.
That's the one George Osborne did.
Exactly. Yes. It's 5 days on, and then 2 days is fasting. It doesn't mean complete fasting, but it just means a low level of
calories, isn't it?
The other thing, which is the midlife fast, and they've all got glorious names now.
Well, I'm nearly 40, so I'm moving in that direction.
It's my birthday coming up next week. I'm going to be in France, coincidentally.
Oh, right, okay.
Hopefully I'll report back on that one. But the 16 to 8, which is what it is, so 16 hours of fasting, but 8 hours is apparently really good, because you just eat within that 8-hour period, and then the body has a chance to recover and do that sort of stuff. Try them. The key about all this sort of things, it's a lifestyle change. And all these people taking these miracle pills and so on and so forth.
Yes. They don't want to change their lifestyle.
They don't want to change. What will happen? It's input and output.
Well,
it's very
exactly,
simple. If you don't change your lifestyle, you have your injections, you have your pills and so on and so forth, and you lose a lot of weight very quickly, you then stop it, you put a lot of weight back on. No surprises there. But key is to stay healthy and that sort of basis. But they also, and what I love about the news is they give you all these wonderful tips every now and again. The other thing is about sleeping. And in I think it's the Telegraph today, they were talking about that sort of side. They give you, if you're feeling exhausted, which a lot of people are at the moment, there are big tips about that.
Why are people feeling exhausted at the moment?
Well, they say a number of things. There's lots of depressing news, which is why we try to change it on this sort of things. But also they're saying, look, if you eat at the same time each day, your body has a chance just to adapt and so on and so forth. If you think positive, so a strain on you works on that sort of basis. Mental health, I know we're both big advocates about talking about mental health.
We're halfway through the year as well. I wonder if the change in weather is perhaps something, because a lot of times, when the weather changes, people sort of say, oh, I'm feeling really tired, or I'm feeling something like that. I wonder if that's maybe part of it as well.
And you're absolutely right, Peter, and suicide rates in countries which are traditionally dark for a long period of time are a lot higher.
Well, there is all of that sort of what's it called? The seasonal affectional disorder. Yes. A friend at university had that,
So you need to sort of look at those sort of things. But they give great tips in there. You socialise, listen to music, calibrate your chatter to your energy level.
Calibrate your chatter to your energy level? What does that mean?
Well, it's sort of rubbish. It's sort of gabble speak, isn't it? Sorry, it wasn't chatter at all, it was clutter. That'll teach you to read it interesting. But it's a similar sort of thing. What they say is that in the post, this relevant person says a clean and tidy desk might automatically suggest a crisp and sparkling mind.
Interesting. I can honestly say, though, I'm a person that if I have sort of a list of things to do, just write it down on a post-it note and cross them off, and
it is satisfying.
You sort of have. There's nothing that gives me greater. Well, there are things that give me greater pleasure, but not very many. Than a clear inbox. Your emails. All the emails are dealt with. Everything's done. All the things are sent off. All the replies are there.
I'm with you on that, and I think it's a great. And
inbox zero.
The short answer is this: is that different techniques for different people.
Yeah.
And talking to people about their mental health and what works for them is really powerful. But you're right. If people are overwhelmed by a to-do list, it's great. Put that to-do list, write it down.
Yeah. And even if you get through a few of them. Yeah.
Absolutely. The satisfaction of crossing that out
Absolutely.
or whatever is brilliant. So good tip.
Andrew, we'll return to the papers in a minute, but I just want to read some text first before the break. One texter says, Peter, regarding AI, the sweet spot for artificial intelligence in the short term would be to reduce reliance on offshore outsourced services. The UK and US relies heavily on offshore services, mostly from Asia. Much of the work outsourced is administrative and repetitive, which is where AI currently excels. On France, lots of people getting in touch. Patrick in Nottingham says, modern France, Peter, is based on revolution, and I learned a while back that the one thing revolutionaries hate most is the next revolution, which is an interesting one. Dan says, why do I listen to Peter? Arsenal football players tells me to visit Rwanda on their shirts, but the court says it's unsafe. Looking at France, migration is becoming a very serious issue. The government needs to do something doing anything, please. Bob says, morning Peter, working people pay £3,000 to £15,000 in national insurance plus pay for private insurance, and most never use any of it. In the EU and Switzerland, I would pay £5,000 per year and have 10 times the service. Switzerland actually has a very good health service. I know a friend of mine uses it who lives there. I would pay, NHS has enough cash, it's being milked by indirect jobs, 50% plus don't work in medicine, it is overloaded by a social system taking many services with zero national insurance contribution. EU or Swiss system is the only way, says Bob. Everyone pays equally based on age and postal code. Well, reform of the NHS is a big thing, and I think that, you know, the government's trying to do something over the next 15 years, but will it work? Let us know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Maybe you work in the NHS actually, and or maybe you just use it a lot, or you're thinking about maybe in years to come you're going to be using it. What do you think about the government's plan to try to fix the NHS, the long-term plan, what you've heard over the last few days in terms of training and in terms of more money going in and services? 0344 499 1000. Couple more. Dawn in Chelmsford says, morning Peter, the riots in France demonstrate just how fragile human society is. Our grip as the dominant species is loosened by these events. Ian in Glasgow says, hi Peter, you and Andrew could be the next David and Renee, but you might need to tweak the shirts. You make a great team, says Ian in Glasgow. John says, another good show. We may agree, we may disagree, but you always allow me to have my say. God bless, from John. What a nice thing from John. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're going to be back with Andrew Eborn taking a deeper dive into the papers in just a few minutes here on Talk TV. Thank you everyone who's been in touch. If you want to ask Andrew and me any question, Andrew and me, any questions about, if you want to ask Andrew or indeed me, any questions about any of the stories that we're talking about today, give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Samara is there willing to take a call. 0344 499 1000. You can text us on 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at Talk TV, or you can follow me at Peter Cardwell. Those who have tweeted include Pete, who says, I would be happy to travel to France. I did work there off and on for 20 years, so I know the places to avoid. Mac G says, multiculturalism doesn't work. It's either deport or en masse, or sacrifice ourselves in our way of life. Never was serious in the first place. Russia looking military and financially stronger than ever. Ground Pilot says, firstly, Sunak is a cardboard cutout and not a true British PM. As for Rwanda, I believe they knew it would never work and used it as a time waster while importing thousands more migrants. Britain isn't under British control. I believe it is steered by globalists, says Ground Pilot. And it's interesting, I mean, do you think the future of Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan is in doubt? Because we heard that massive announcement there by the Court of Appeal on Thursday in regard to that. And do you actually think any migrants will be sent to Rwanda? Do you think any planes will take off? Do you have confidence in the process? That's a big question politically at the moment. We're going to get into that a little bit later on with Alicia Fitzgerald, who is a political correspondent at politics.co.uk and a bit of a rising star actually in political coverage. Mick says the NHS can save millions by stopping extravagant waste, staff theft and malingerers. Richard in Aberdeen says, Peter, why don't we get AI to process the migrants' refugee applications? It would be far quicker than the current system. And Melanie in Worthing in West Sussex says, hi Peter, what a great show as usual. Thank you, Melanie, that's very kind. I haven't heard from you before, so appreciate that to my recollection anyway. Lots and lots to talk about that's in the papers today. One thing I'm a bit worried about, Andrew Eborn, barrister and broadcaster, is still with me. Nigel Farage has had his bank accounts cancelled, apparently because of his political views. We don't know exactly the motivations of the banks. And there's a story in one of the papers, as well as at the Times there, yes, about a building society closing a vicar's account after a trans protest. Tell us what happened there.
It is quite extraordinary, isn't it? Because, as you say, Farage and also various other people have had their bank accounts taken away from them. And the problem is you are then not a person, because you can't borrow money, yes, you can't get your salary paid in, you can't have debit cards and so on and so forth. Well, apparently, and this is in the Times today, the building society closed a vicar's account after trans protest. And it was an Anglican church leader, and he basically accused the Yorkshire Building Society of bullying him after this particular thing. And
so what happened? What was the protest about?
Well, he was basically saying to them about their position on trans. So his position was exactly that, and it's an emotive subject, and I get it.
Yeah.
But the more important issue, as far as this is concerned, is the ability of financial institutions to take away what should be a fundamental right.
Yes.
You You need a bank account in order to survive.
And what did the financial institution, what did the bank actually say?
Well, they just said they have the right to choose who their customers are.
Interesting.
And I think this is the problem. And all sorts of different reasons have been cited for different people. You've mentioned some of them, counsellors and so on and so forth. If they're worried about money being paid from enemy forces,
I mean,
all that sort of
I can
stuff.
totally understand in terms of if there is crime, if there is, if there's money laundering, if there are dodgy things happening, if they suspect criminality, and a lot of what the banks do now is deal with the criminality themselves. Most people, well, not most people, but a heck of a lot of people listening and watching to this will have been defrauded. I know I have been, I think, 3 times.
Yes.
And what happens is that the bank, can see what's happening and monitors your account, and that's fair enough. But to take away your sort of right to a bank account, that worries me.
I think we absolutely need to look at this, because if you had to realise, anybody watching, listening at the moment, and most of the population are obviously, if you have to look at that sort of side and say, well, what would happen if your bank account was taken away? You can't have your salary paid in. You can't borrow money. You can't. Well,
there are people who contact me on this programme who worry about sort of a cashless society as well, because they sort of say if everything's cashless, well then the government and your bank basically knows all your transactions or can find them out necessarily, and that to me is something to think about, I suppose. But in terms of not being given access to a bank account because of your political views, that is something that I think is
I think it's abhorrent. I think whatever people's political views are, and I think it does need to be looked at. So we have tighter regulations. You cannot take away somebody's fundamental right unless there's crime involved, as you rightly say. And I think,
but just because you disagree with someone, and also who's to say what's right and wrong? I mean, the trans issue, for example, that vicar. I know there'll be loads of people watching and listening to this programme who will absolutely agree with that vicar and say what his stance is on trans is absolutely right. There will be other people who will disagree. But I mean, it's sort of fascinating to think that because of someone's expressed view that they would take away goods and services from them.
And what we don't know, Peter, as you say, is you get the headline, and without having the Yorkshire Building Society on here to say, well, there are other factors and so on and so forth.
And there might be,
which is why we can't comment too much on that sort of thing. But the headline is horrendous. If you've got political views we don't agree with, we can take away your bank account, is not good. What we need with all these situations is clarity.
Yes.
You need to turn around and say, you're entitled to a bank account. It has to be a fundamental human right, because otherwise you can't operate in society.
But also, I suppose, banks as commercial operators, as commercial companies, they might say, well, actually, this could damage us in terms of our brand if we're seen to be giving a bank account to someone we disagree with. This is a really interesting one. Actually, I wonder what the viewers and listeners think of this one. Should bank accounts be taken away from people because of their views, because of their political views? Have you maybe had a goods or services denied to you because of your political views? Let us know what you think. 0344 499 1000. It's a really, really interesting one. I want to talk as well about the royals, because in the Express there's a plea for Diana's sons, the 2 princes, William and Harry, to bury the hatchet. Do you think they're going to?
Absolutely not in each other's heads, I hope.
Well, indeed.
But the principle is this. Today would have been Princess Diana's 62nd birthday.
Really?
Yeah. So this is why it's sort of coming up here again. And she, glorious, everybody sort of loved Diana. There was that whole sort of, or they did for a period of time. And the media, as they always do, they had a love-hate relationship with her. But certainly she united the nation in grief at the time of her death, and so on and so forth. And she would, like any mother would be devastated to see her 2 children fighting. And what it was, this particular story, Honour Diana's Memory, Bury the Hatchet. Basically, both William and Harry were at an event yesterday, but they wouldn't even talk to each other. And the picture there, you can always get a picture, doesn't necessarily tell 1,000 words. You can get them looking at each other fondly or whatever.
I can see why they're not talking to one another. I can certainly see why William's not talking to Harry. I mean, no matter what he says, it'll probably end up in a Netflix documentary. I mean, he can't exactly trust his brother.
Well, he's been dropped all over the place, sadly. So,
well, that's right.
It may not end up anywhere.
The lesser Spotified Meghan, certainly, absolutely.
But I think it's a family thing, isn't it? They're using this as a catalyst. Diana's birthday would have been today. Turning around and seeing 2 brothers fighting each other is not good. But fighting in public, and then, as you say, it's been publicly written. It's in Spare. It's on Netflix documentary. You're talking about all the spats and so on and so forth. And the royal stories seem to work on that sort of premise where we love our royals. It's one of our best things around. around the world. The pomp and ceremony that we do for royal occasions is better than any around the world, and we draw people on that sort of principle. But we're also fascinated. And, you know, it was P.T. Barnum who said, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. And even if it's not true, you work on that sort of basis, that you talk about the Spat column inches. So much ink has been spilt on this.
It would be much less exciting if they got on famously and thought everything was wonderful. But then, you know, some royal families around the world just managed to get that.
And it's not just royal families. I'm sure that people watching at home will have their own spats with their own sort of families
completely,
and things like that. And if you had the spotlight of the media watching your every step, and sometimes putting a...
I wouldn't want the media watching my every step in my relations with my family, to be brutally honest. Sometimes you say things you regret. I get on a lot better with my brother now than I used to, it must be said. Someone has been in touch, June has been in touch to say, OK, so we keep being told to be more environmentally friendly, yet your guest wants to exploit the moon. Seriously, these people don't seem to consider how crazy this sounds. I mean, it's more China wants to exploit. I don't think you personally want to go drilling on the moon.
With them, but it is, I do think we should explore other planets, but not me personally. I think I'd be a bit nervous. Now, this was the China will drill the moon for minerals, which is, we have lots of planets out there, zillions upon zillions. There are rich minerals out there. And yes, we should be friendly with each other. I think your 2 points on that. But it wasn't me personally going up there.
No, not just yet. I want to go to a call before the top of the hour on the Cashless Society. Maybe Stephen in Manchester, I see, has given us a call about that. We'll see if we can get him back on the line. But first of all, I want to talk about elephants' hot testicles may prevent cancer.
Well, isn't this...
We've been talking about these crazy cancer stories.
Well, no, but what we love, and this is one the thing about the media, is you turn around and you want to find cancer cures. That's what AI is helping with. It's helping to... Basically, we've got the whole of the DNA now. We can map that out, all thanks to AI. Now, this great story in the Times says elephants get the balls rolling for cancer studies.
What on earth have elephants' testicles got to do with
cancer? Well, I'll tell you what it is. Almost 50 years, scientists have wondered why elephants rarely develop cancer. And apparently it's to do with their testicles.
Right.
And what happens is, because their testicles are inside and they're not very fertile, it means that the relevant things that might cause cancer don't affect them in the same sort of way. And because our testicles are on the outside, I mean, it's a Sunday or Saturday morning and I don't want to put people off their croissant, but this is the sort of principle. So they're looking at this and saying, look, is there a lesson that can be learnt by having cooler testicles? Does that actually mean that we're more at risk of cancer? And so a scientist is having a look at that sort of side, because elephants don't get cancer, but they have really hot balls, is what they say.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, that is we learn something new every day. Let's talk to we'll talk to Stephen in a second, but let's talk to Sue in Chelmsford first. Sue, you've given us a call on 0344 499 1000. Sue, what would you like to say to us? Good morning to you.
Good morning, Peter. It's a minor point compared with what's going on at the moment in France and everywhere else, but it's about the NHS and their funding. I don't know if you're aware that the NHS actually employs over 900 NHS chaplains.
Okay, yeah.
They're actually employed, they're paid. It costs the NHS £25 million a year, and if we didn't pay those, we could employ another 1,000 junior nurses. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have chaplains or even provision for chaplains in a hospital, but I think they shouldn't be paid by the NHS.
Maybe they provide a good service to people. I mean, there are lots of people, of course, who work in the NHS who don't necessarily work directly in sort of healing patients, but you think the money should be spent on nurses?
I think the money should be spent directly on medical matters and not chaplaincy. I mean, many people who go to hospital who might be religious would have maybe a local vicar or...
Maybe they could come in rather than the chaplains, yeah.
Oh, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? I didn't know those statistics, but are you saying that you shouldn't have chaplains at all, or that the NHS shouldn't fund it?
What do you think?
I'm saying the NHS shouldn't fund it.
But you should have chaplains. Is that what you're saying?
I'm agnostic, let's say, about whether there should be chaplains there. I think there should be faith and reflection centres.
Sure.
In the hospital where I worked, I did a Freedom of Information Act when I worked there, inquiry into how much they were paid, not personally, but just the pay range, and it's up to £45,000 a year.
Okay.
For a chaplain.
So sorry.
There are now 7 chaplains at my hospital. It's only a small hospital.
Yeah, it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. Sue, thank you for that call. I want to get Stephen in before the news. Stephen, you want to talk about a cashless society? Good morning.
Morning, Stephen.
Through the aegis of Manchester Civic Society, I have campaigned tirelessly on this topic on two bases, with institutions like hospitals, museums, pubs and so forth. I've said the following. Number one, you cannot be inclusive if you are precluding people who use solely physical cash.
Yep.
And number two, there are very real incumbent dangers going forward, because big corporate entities and governments will utilise this position of no alternative to control you, to monitor you, to advertise to you.
I agree with every single word you're saying there, Stephen. What do you make of this vicar and Nigel Farage as well, who've had their apparently had their bank accounts taken away from them because of their political views? What do you make of that?
Well, it's a straw in the wind of control. Anybody who feels that, in this country we're safe from sort of measures of political control is naive. And it's yet another evidence that we should not be entirely in the hands of big corporate entities and government. It's deeply concerning. I have to say to you, I personally... I'm proud to say I've had a great deal of success in raising this topic and bringing quite major institutions back into the use of cash. So I say to everybody, if you come across it, you go to a pub and they're asking you for card only, say no. And take it up with them, challenge it.
Okay.
And I think it's so important that we keep cash.
Thanks, Stephen. Really appreciate your thoughts there. Stephen in Manchester there. Thanks, Andrew Eborn, as well.
Real pleasure to see you, as always.
Broadcaster, lovely to chat to you. We're going to get a political update in a minute. And if you want to keep talking about this issue about Cashless Society, let us know. 0344 499 1000. It's my show, but it's your show too, here on Talk TV.
This is Talk TV.